And next we have the panel of federal benefits experts. Really thrilled about this, and that'll be moderated by our special guest, Mimi Geerges from News Channel 8, Government Matters TV. She has an extensive background in hosting, interviewing, and producing in broadcast, cable, and radio. If you Google her, which I did, you will find tremendous presence.
Really? Is there a lot?
There is, indeed. And it's all good. I watched
really
quite a
should
few.
Google
Your
myself.
shows have been good for a long, long time. She worked with Sirius XM Radio, C-SPAN, Al Jazeera English, and she's interviewed high-profile guests such as President Jimmy Carter, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, CIA Director Michael Hayden, and many more. So, Mimi, please welcome Mimi with me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Shane, and to Stacy, and to all of you for being here and for having me. I really enjoy this opportunity to talk to you guys. As Shane said, I host Government Matters TV. It's on WJLA and ABC7, so be sure to check it out. We're on nightly, 8 and 10:30 during the week, and Sunday mornings at 10:30 on ABC7. I've also got my colleague Jerry Foley here. He's in the back, joining me from Government Matters. And really, I do hope you check it out because it's a program focused on the federal government, the programs that the government does that only the government can do for the American people, the operations, how it operates, and really the people behind it. So I hope you'll check it out. I'd like to go ahead and introduce the panel. We're going to be talking for about an hour. We're going to have time for questions at the end, so please be thinking about that. So first is Kevin Moss at the end. He is the Director of Marketing for Checkbook Health and is a senior editor with Consumers Checkbook. Over 20 years of experience at Checkbook, leading marketing and fundraising. And during open season, he holds numerous FEHB webinars for federal employees and regularly appears on federal employee websites and podcasts, an MBA from Johns Hopkins University. Courtney Bublé is a staff correspondent with Government Executive. She covers the federal government with a focus on oversight, management, contracting, and regulations, frequent guest on GovExec's daily podcast. And in 2022, she won the American Society of Business Publication Editors Young Leader Scholarship and was selected for the Poynter Koch Media and Journalism Fellowship for 2022 and 23. And finally, Debbie Hatch is the founder of Pinnacle Personnel Services. She has extensive amount of training experience in both technical and soft skill elements of human resources management, leadership, and federal benefits. She has worked for and with the federal government since 1995. She was a federal employee within the Departments of Defense, Air Force, and Veterans Affairs. And she's trained countless federal employees on their retirement and federal benefits using her personal retirement triad: health, wellness, and wealth and personal fulfillment. Welcome to all of you. Thank you. I want to start with you, Courtney. Inflation. Mm-hmm. It's affecting everybody, and it's near historic highs. What specific impact has it had on federal workers and retirees?
Sure. So inflation, like you said, has really impacted all aspects of our lives. But particularly when it comes to Social Security, the SSA announced last week that the annual COLA for fiscal 2023 will be 8.7%, which is one of the largest increases in decades. However, not all federal retirees are going to see that increase, which I'm sure my co-panelists can talk about a little bit more. And that's because of the difference of the two systems. And there have been some calls over the years for parity between the two systems. But I think when we talk about inflation, that's going to be one of the biggest impacts we see for feds.
Kevin, what about you? What impact will inflation have on federal benefits?
Well, next year, you're going to be paying a lot more for your FEHB premium. A couple weeks ago, OPM announced that the average enrollee increase is going to be 8.7%. Understand that that increase isn't uniform across all the 270 plus health plans available to federal employees. For example, there are 56 plans where the premium's actually going down, decreasing, 8 plans where the premium's staying the same, 119 plans where the increase is less than the average, and 78 plans where the increase is above the average. And there's some big outliers. There's a plan in Nevada, for example, where the premium went down 36%. There's a plan in New Mexico that raised their premium 50%. And there's one plan in Illinois that has a 35% increase, but because of a very high premium to start with, that's going to cost a self-only enrollee $6,500 or more per year next year. So one piece of homework I always tell all federal employees, your plan that you have this year is not going to be the same plan that you're going to have next year. The premium more than likely has changed. It's probably gone up. It's a good reason to check your premium every year to see what it's going to be like next year, and maybe there's some additional plan values that are out there that you haven't considered before, that this very high increase, the highest increase in the last 10 years, will help you, push you to maybe consider some new options where you could actually save some money.
Debbie, your thoughts on the impact of inflation and also the downturn in the stock market?
So as far as inflation goes, the cost of living adjustment is nice, right? A lot of people are looking at that to go, oh, it's an 8.7% increase, as Courtney said, but they don't understand that everything else is going up, just as the health insurance, and not all of our federal employees will get that 8.7% cost of living adjustment. As Courtney indicated, we've got those two different systems out there. So the people that are under the civil service retirement system, or the old system is what we call that, they get the full amount of the COLA. But under FERS, which is the new system that's been around since 1987, people get, a lot of times when we're doing training, we call it diet COLA. Because if the cost of living adjustment is above 3%, the FERS retirees actually get 1% less than the COLA that the CSRS people are getting. So those under CSRS would get the 8.7, and those under FERS would get the 7.7, if that. Because under FERS, people don't get any cost of living adjustment unless they retire on a disability or they retire under something called special provisions, which are our federal law enforcement officers, firefighters, air traffic controllers, and some of the Customs and Border Protection officers that have opted under that law enforcement piece. Those retirees are eligible for COLA once they retire, but all of the other FERS people have to wait until they're 62 before they start getting anything, and then it's potentially this 1% less.
You know, I want to ask you, Courtney, about the COVID pandemic and the vaccine mandate. What's the latest on that?
So President Biden issued vaccine mandates for federal employees and federal contractors last year, and there's been a slew of legal challenges, a lot of stops and starts. Currently, for federal employees, the mandate is not being enforced. For contractors, we actually had some news yesterday. The nationwide injunction on the mandate was officially lifted, but it's still not being enforced. The Office of Management and Budget will be releasing further guidance about those states where it can be enforced, how it will happen, but nothing yet. If you're not familiar, the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force has been releasing guidance on all of these things. But when it comes to, enforcing it for different contracts, that'll have to be something you have to talk with your contracting officials with. But for federal employees, what we need to know now is that it's not being enforced. It could be soon. But we also have to remember that the mandate does not include boosters. We have several boosters now. It's just for that initial shot, and the majority of the country is vaccinated. So the impact it's going to have, not sure yet, just because we're over a year now from the mandate being instituted, and like I said, the majority of the country is vaccinated. And I know there were some concerns when the president first issued the mandate that it would have, maybe a devastating impact on the workforce, maybe force more people to leave. I don't think we've really seen that yet, especially because of all these legal challenges. But that is something, to keep an eye out for. And also, I don't know if this is implied or not, but the exemptions from medical or religious reasons are not being processed for federal employees just because of the ongoing litigation.
And Debbie, did the COVID pandemic change the way federal workers are retiring?
I think it did. And in talking about the vaccine mandate, there were certainly a lot of employees that were concerned as the mandate was coming out about how that was going to impact them. And I know I was contacted, and many of people who do what I do, teaching retirement, were contacted by federal employees just wanting to know if they decided to resign from the federal government instead of staying to see what was going to happen, what kind of benefits would they be eligible for. So that it raised a lot of question and a lot of concerns from federal employees just wanting to know about leaving, resigning, and being able to get benefits later on. As far as the retirement piece of things, it's kind of gone both ways. There's an interesting dichotomy in that a lot of people are, I think, realizing that life has an expiration date. We saw that with COVID. They knew people that were impacted by it, and so maybe they're a little bit less likely to stay working for the next 30 or 40 years. They want to get on with their lives. But then bringing in the inflation piece of things too, that means that people worry more about whether they can afford to retire. So it could go either way.
Is there a retirement tsunami? Have we seen that? What are the actual numbers?
Yeah, and I pulled up the actual numbers because when I looked at them face value, yes, I would say yes, it seems like there's a retirement tsunami. The first 3 months of this year, we had a lot of people retire. Now, we normally see a lot of people, as far as OPM's numbers, in January. That's because many federal employees retire on December 31st, and so the work gets to the Office of Personnel Management in January. But then come February, it drops off a little bit, and come March, it drops off a little bit. In 2022, we saw the elevated numbers in January. February went down, but very little, not as much as it normally does. And then March went down, but not as much as it normally does. So those stayed elevated for a period of time. Now, having said that, okay, that's face value. I added up the numbers as I was preparing to come in and talk, and they actually weren't as high as I thought they were. For 2022, the first 9 months of the year, we've had 84,842 federal employees retire. That's a lot. But when I look at the numbers for 2021, it was 80,858. So there was an increase that's just under 5%. Now, if we go back and look at pre-COVID, the numbers were definitely a lot smaller than they are right now.
And Courtney, what effect are you seeing from retirements and the ability of agencies to fill those positions?
Sure. So there's been a concern for years, well before the pandemic, that this retirement wave is going to happen and that there won't be enough people to, build the pipeline. I crunched the numbers, and as of June of this year, that's the most recent data from OPM, there were 8.4% of the federal workforce was under 30 compared to 14.8%. So I know there's always a concern about, not having enough young people in the government just to, have diverse perspectives and whatnot, but also to fill those positions for when those people do leave and to have people in place. And I know with a potential post-COVID retirement wave, there is concerns about that. So I know a lot of agencies are trying to change some of the recruitment methods to just go to where young people are to find them to say, hey, like the government's a cool place to work, like you should try to join us. So that's something that I think a lot of agencies are thinking about right now.
Kevin, open season is less than a month away. Before we talk about details of the benefits, will open season be different this year as we start to emerge from the pandemic?
A little bit. You might have an in-person health insurance fair, which those have been virtual for the last couple of years. Outside of that, in terms of the FEHB program's response to the pandemic, you'll still see all the FEHB plans offer telehealth benefits, generally at the same copay or coinsurance that you would normally pay when you go see your doctor. A few health plans are now also offering third-party telehealth services where if your doctor is unavailable and you have a problem, you can use this third-party service to talk to a doctor someplace else in the country. Outside of that, this is the latest possible date that open season can start because Halloween is on a Monday this year. So it's November 14th, which is later than normal. And then you have a major federal holiday in there too with Thanksgiving. So I almost am thinking like open season is a 3-week process now instead of a 4-week process. And there's a lot of changes. The premium's a big story. Understand that the benefits can change every year of your plan as well. The best place to look for that, Section 2 of the official plan brochure will tell you this is how your plan has changed. And in response to inflation, There are a few outlier examples of certain health plans raising prices on benefits as well that that you might see. There's a plan that I looked at this morning where they doubled the out-of-network catastrophic limit, doubled last year to this year. And so that's not a uniform thing. It's not all health plans have done that. I think the takeaway really is, even if you're happy with your health plan, you need to look to see how it's changed.
So you're saying that even something that was covered all of a sudden will not be covered. That's possible.
Oh, it's possible, and that's possible. It's also possible that something that wasn't covered is now covered. For example, Aetna had a very narrow acupuncture benefit that was related to certain anesthesia. They now have general acupuncture benefit in all their health plans, 10 visits a year. That's something they added to their health plan. So this is possibly a new benefit that you've never used before. Maybe it was a reason why you didn't select an Aetna plan in the past. So you have to look to see all your choices, and there's a lot. Just in the DC area, there's 38 FEHB plans with open enrollment. So there's a lot to look at, a lot to consider.
You mentioned acupuncture. What about other alternative medicines, chiropractors or things like that?
Yeah, I think most FEHB plans will cover this. They generally put limits to how many visits they'll cover, and there is variances across the plans. It may only be like 10 visits. Some plans may have 20 visits. Some plans may have unlimited visits. So it's one of those things, if those particular healthcare services are meaningful for you, if it's something that you take advantage of quite a bit, then you may look to a health plan that covers those well, but don't lose the larger picture of how much you're paying for a particular health plan. If we have a moment, we can talk about Blue Cross Blue Shield. They have about 2/3 market share. 2/3 welfare employees are in some Blue Cross health plan. Those premiums have gone up generally above average. I've got the numbers here. Blue Cross Basic is going up 12% next year. Blue Cross Standard is going up 11%. FEP Blue Focus, though, only 2%. If you're on Blue Cross Standard, there are many differences between Standard and Basic and FEP Blue Focus, but two of the biggest ones are out-of-network coverage, meaning that you can go see a doctor outside of the Blue Cross network, and mail-order prescription drugs. You get those with Standard, you don't get them with Basic and FEP Blue Focus. But if you're not using those services, you might be overpaying. You could switch from Blue Cross Standard to FEP Blue Focus. You will save $5,700 in a self and family enrollment, and for sure expense. The premium is a for sure expense. So take a look at all the options that are available to you.
Courtney, Kevin had mentioned earlier telehealth. I want to ask you about telework and remote work. What's the latest guidance on that?
Sure. So as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, the federal government did have a switch to maximum telework for the pandemic. And the effort to bring employees back into offices, even if it's on a part-time basis, has kind of had a lot of stops and starts due to the variants. First we had Delta, then Omicron, then the Omicron variants. And it really comes down to an individual basis. Like, even though the president did say during his State of the Union address, I want the federal government to, kind of be a leader in the return to office process, it is coming down to either agencies or even the individual teams themselves. A lot of agencies are doing a hybrid model. Some are just leaning in more to telework, remote work, and overall the Biden administration, again, the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force, has really said that, the pandemic has shown we can be productive in a semi-remote or completely remote environment, and it can be a way to increase DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the workforce, because you can give people opportunities they wouldn't necessarily have. So again, there hasn't been like one set, hey, we're all going back to the office date. It's kind of been on a rolling basis, and I don't think there's even any numbers on that right now. And those decisions are really being made on a more individual level with the guidance from the task force as well as OPM, OMB.
Do federal employees, though, that don't want to return to work, that are being asked to go, do they have any recourse?
Yeah, so they can take it up, I guess, with their managers themselves. If they're in a union, that can be something the union takes up, or if relevant, they can go to their EEO office or OSC, Office of Special Counsel. So there are different avenues, but I would say it kind of depends on what the reasoning is for that complaint, like where they would go.
Debbie, just following up on that, the idea of telework or remote work, where you're not even in the same city that your office might be, what impact does that have on retirement?
I think that slowed retirement, especially initially, as everybody was kind of figuring that out. And the fact that, I mean, the pandemic as a whole, right? I don't have to go into work anymore. I don't have to fight traffic. I don't have to sit there, certainly in the Beltway. You know what that's like. Maybe I was planning to retire, but now all of a sudden I don't have to do all of those things. I don't have that expense anymore. And so I think many people put off retiring to see what that was going to look like. And now that we do have the flexibility of being able to do remote work and telework, maybe they were contemplating retiring because they didn't want to be in the city and they didn't want to have to do all of that stuff, but now they can go wherever they want to. And so I think that does mean that potentially more people continue to work.
Kevin, let's pivot now to dental and vision plans. What differences are you seeing this year?
Not many. And the good news on the dental coverage side is that the premiums have gone up less than 1%. So what you were paying for one of the standalone dental plans last year is probably is very close to what you'll be paying this year. I think the thing to consider when we talk about dental is, although most FEHB plans aren't going to cover much, there are some that actually do cover preventative care if you use one of their in-network dentists. And if you are a low dental user, you probably are better served not actually signing up for one of those standalone Fed VIP plans. Maybe look for an FEHB plan where you're getting that free preventative care or very low cost preventative care. And then look to other savings vehicles that are available to federal employees that sadly only less than 20% take advantage of, and that is the flexible spending account.
Yeah, explain how those work.
All right, so the flexible spending account, sadly, less than 20%. What I tell all active federal employees is that should be 100%, because everyone has some predictable out-of-pocket healthcare expense, whether that be at the dentist or vision or doctor copays that you know you're going to face next year, or prescription drug costs. So there's that bucket of expense. The other bucket of expense is one of the things that happened because of the pandemic was over-the-counter items that used to be FSA eligible were taken away unless you had a prescription, are now back in play. So your allergy medicine that you might buy at your local pharmacy, for example, that is an eligible FSA expense. So it may be a little bit harder for you to predict how many of those items you might have in a year, but you can throw some money towards that. And then the final one is there some predictable large healthcare expense that you may face next year? And also the things that we can't predict, such as if we get sick, we're going to go to the urgent care, or we might have to go to the emergency room. One of the impacts of inflation 2 days ago, the IRS announced that the maximum contribution limit to an FSA is going up by $200. It's now $3,050, and the user lose aspect of the FSA, where if you don't use everything, you lose it, that rollover amount has also gone up $40 to $610.
But that's what I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
In case you don't use that money that was set aside.
Yeah, well, you could potentially lose it. So you have to be able to budget somewhat carefully here, that you're not going up to the $3,000 max and only have $1,000 of out-of-pocket healthcare expenses. So if you've never done one before, you can start one with a minimum of $100 just to get used to it. But probably maybe even go up to $500. Realize there's no risk in putting $500 into an FSA, because that full amount can roll over. And I don't know about all families or all individuals, but I think most of us have at least a few $100s of those out-of-pocket healthcare expenses. And why not save 30% on those? This is a for sure savings that's on the table for you.
But what if you retire or leave before you use it all?
That's an interesting question. Do you know this answer, Debbie?
I do know the answer.
Okay, go for it.
I want to add a couple of things to what you just said, though. First, about the health insurance, that some of them do have the preventative care for dental, because the ages that we can take care of our children is different for each one of our insurance benefits. Children can stay on a health insurance plan until they turn 26, but they come off a dental plan when they turn 22. So I do think it's important that federal employees know that some of those FEHB plans, not all of them, they don't cover everything for dental, but if my child is coming off the dental insurance at 22 and I can put them on my FEHB plan and be able to have preventative dental care for another 4 years, that's definitely something that people need to know about. As far as the flexible spending accounts too, one thing Kevin said is that we can use them for everything, right? Over-the-counter medication is back on the table again. It was off for a temporary period of time. So when I'm doing training with federal employees, I tell them to pay attention, right? You budget appropriately, you plan as much as you can. Things happen, you don't necessarily know, but then you just don't set it and forget it either. You're looking at that in the summertime. You're looking at that as we're getting close to another open season, and maybe if you have extra money in there that you're at risk of losing, that you're gonna go and stock your medicine cabinet or buy hand sanitizer, reading glasses, or whatever. I make a joke in my classes about this is the time that you get those 12 pair of designer reading glasses so that you can use the money in your flexible spending account. They don't go into retirement. They don't go into retirement. So that is definitely something to know. In that last year, as we're transitioning into retirement, the flexible spending accounts turn off on the day that you go out the door. So your expenses have to be accrued up to that point. You can file your claims afterwards, but you have to have those expenses accrued up to that point. I don't think that has a lot of impact to federal employees simply because many people retire on December 31st, which is the end of the use period anyway. But if they were planning to have a carryover, they do need to know that they can't carry over unless they enroll for a flexible spending account in the coming year, and they can't have it if they're going into retirement.
Kevin, there's also a health savings account.
Yeah. So
What's the difference with an FSA, and can anyone have one?
every federal employee can have a health savings account if you join a high deductible health plan. Those are the plans that give you a health savings account. However, there's some important caveats. You cannot have a high deductible health plan with a health savings account and a general purpose healthcare FSA. Those are IRS rules that you can't double dip basically into that tax preferred status for both. But there is something called a limited use flexible spending account that someone with a health savings account can have, but it's only for dental and vision. We highly recommend if you have a high deductible health plan with a health savings account that you do the limited use FSA, because then you can use that for your dental and vision. And the goal with the HSA really is the plan's going to contribute some money for you, and if you're able to, if your situation allows you to contribute a little extra money into that as well, it's always there for you if you need it, but better if I don't touch it, and I have investment choices. I can choose how I want that health savings account invested. Not a great year to be invested in anything with the health savings account, but generally, in most years, you're going to see some return when you do that. And if I can keep that and growing at year over year, we know many federal employees that have upwards of $50,000 saved in their health savings account. When you turn 55, and there's something called a catch-up contribution where you can throw an additional $1,000 in. With the health savings account, you can have more tax-preferred money go into it. The FSA cap is $30.50. I think for a Self Plus One, you're almost to $8,000 into the HSA that you can put towards that. And then the one cool thing is when you turn 65, you no longer have a penalty for using HSA funds for non-medical care expenses. At that point, it almost turns into an IRA. I can take a non-healthcare related expense and use it and only pay my normal tax rates.
Debbie, if I were to ask you what's the best way for a retiree to save money, what would you say?
I would say that it is really important, and I don't think federal employees do a good job of this, to pay attention to that annual open season. Many federal employees, and Kevin and I were talking about that even before we came into the room today, don't ever change their health insurance plan. They came to work one day, they might not have done any research themselves. They asked somebody in the office, what do you have? And that person says, this is what I have, so now that's what I have as well, and that's what I keep. Like I marry this, and 30 years down the road, I have that same health insurance plan, even though it may have gone up substantially in cost, and my life situation may have changed as well. You know, maybe now I'm eligible for Medicare, and really I just need some type of a Medicare Advantage plan or a supplement, but I keep holding on to this really expensive, really nice health insurance plan because now I'm comfortable with it, I'm used to it. So that's one way they can save money.
You mentioned advice. You know, a lot of people do ask their coworkers, what's the best way to get advice, not just on health plans, but on retirement?
Definitely, coworkers do talk amongst one another, and I teach federal retirement. I mean, that's something I do. I know that a lot of times there's a little bit of information that's put out there, or somebody is giving advice when their situation isn't exactly the same as this other person. So I always caution people against that. Unless your situation is exactly the same as that other person's, what's working for them may not necessarily work for you. That's a good way for you to get some good information, but then I always recommend that people also take the time to educate themselves. Maybe they're going back and they're reading through GovExec. Maybe they're looking through the NARF magazine to see, okay, is this really how it works? That's a great starting place, that advice from someone else, but that's not the only thing that you need to take in. You also need to do your own research and educate yourself.
Kevin, Debbie mentioned Medicare. Any significant changes to Medicare plans this year?
Yeah, some good news. Off a record Part B increase last year. Part B, which is the optional part of Medicare that you have to decide to take or not take. If you decide not to take it, there's a penalty if you decide further down the road whether you want it. It's gone down about $5, the base Medicare Part B. So that's some good news. And then we continue to see more FEHB plans offer one of these Medicare Advantage options, where if you enroll in the FEHB plan and you're enrolled in Part B, and you take the final step of enrolling into the Medicare Advantage plan offered, then you get a pretty sweet deal where there are some plans that will reimburse a portion, in some cases almost the full amount of your Part B premium, and importantly, you pay zero out-of-pocket costs to go to the doctor, or if you're hospitalized, or for chiropractor, if you use a provider that accepts Medicare. And so these are amazing deals. Every federal retiree or soon-to-be federal retiree has to consider these options. There's one national option at an Advantage. In the DC area, United Healthcare Choice Plans have this set up. You absolutely have to take a look at it. For anyone who doesn't need routine international care, so if every FEHB plan has emergency overseas care, so that, you know, if you're on holiday and you break your leg, all FEHB plans are going to cover that. But if you spend 6 months of the year in Panama and you need routine health care, these Medicare Advantage plans aren't good options for you. And the other caveat is that if your income is above a certain threshold, you actually pay a higher Part B premium. In that case, these plans are less good. And in that situation, you probably aren't a good candidate to be paying Part B to begin with.
So, Debbie, your thoughts on that? I mean, what do you recommend to people?
What I do is provide information to people, right? Education to people, and then we all make different decisions because we all have different things going on, and I really firmly believe that it is important to look at our own situation. The limits, as far as people have to pay extra for their Medicare Part B, it's above $97,000 if it's a single tax filer, and it's above $194,000 if it's a married couple filing jointly. And there are several different segments above that. So definitely that's something to look at, but even at those higher income levels, I think there's two things that people need to know. There is a potential penalty. If they change their mind later on and they sign up for Medicare Part B, it's a 10% per year penalty for each year that they didn't enroll, but they could have been covered. So you may be saving some money now, but what does that look like down the road? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, maybe the person's going to be okay. Plenty of people don't sign up for Part B, but a lot of others do end up signing up later on and get hit with that substantial penalty. So that's something that they definitely need to be aware of. The other thing I think is, once again, and we've said this already, but make sure that you're looking once you are 65 or older and retired, because if you're still working and you have an FEHB plan, you don't need Medicare Part B. That's a thing that is a bit of misinformation out there. A lot of people have heard about that 10% penalty, and so even though they're working, once they hit 65, they think they need to go and sign up, and they don't. As long as they have health insurance through their employer, they and their spouse can wait for a special Medicare enrollment period, which is up to 8 months after they leave their federal job.
And Kevin, you've actually done some modeling on ways for retirees to save money. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, every year, our Guide to Health Plans for Federal Employees, we have a plan comparison tool where we take a look at all of the healthcare options that are available to people, both active employees and the retired employees. And, you know, since we were talking about retirees, these Medicare Advantage deals, they are significant. I don't have the numbers yet for this year. I will in a couple of weeks. But last year, for example, a Self+1 enrollment with Blue Cross Standard going to one of these United plans, United Choice plans with Medicare Advantage, the savings, estimated yearly cost savings of $7,000. These are significant, significant savings. This isn't just $100. These are really potentially thousands of dollars of savings looking at those plans. So they, you know, the one great thing about the FEHB system, by the way, is you always have choice, and you only have to keep your option for 1 year, right? So if you went down this road with a Medicare Advantage plan and it didn't work out for you the way that you thought it did, you could go back to your old plan next year. That's the real great part about this. And the retiree advantage plans they're really great plans, and you have to take a look. And we also looked at Medicare star scores on these plans to make sure that members were satisfied. Almost all of these Medicare Advantage options are 5-star plans. I think there's one that's a 4-star plan, but they're getting good ratings from members who are satisfied in these plans.
And Debbie, I want to talk about TSP now, and I know you're not a financial planner, but what do you tell people when it comes to picking the TSP funds?
Okay, and thank you for saying that, right. I'm not a certified financial planner, and what I say in my classroom is I'm not going to play one either, right? I don't play one when I'm in front of the class or online. I'm all about information. So what I tell people is that they need to understand all of the options that we have available. There's a whole bunch of stuff, right? People can invest in the G fund, which is non-traded government securities. We can do 2 domestic stock funds, which are the S and the C. And we have an international fund. We have a bond fund. All of those have risk. I think it's important for people to know what kind of risk comes with which fund and then think about themselves. We all have a financial personality as well, and we are adverse or not to risk and to certain different levels of that. I need to know what kind of risk comes with each of those plans, what kind of risk I'm personally comfortable with, and then make my decision based upon that.
And then age and how close you are to retirement.
Age and how close you are to retirement, but also there are a lot of federal employees, and I'll pick on the G fund. Many federal employees feel very comfortable with that non-traded government security fund because they don't ever see a negative number. It's non-traded, it's not in the market. They're not going to see anything like they are in the stock market, but there's an unrealized risk. That's my terminology. TSP doesn't call it a risk, but that is this. We're losing the value of money, right? I don't see a negative number, but if G is giving me a rate of return that isn't even keeping up with inflation, I can buy fewer things with the same amount of money later on. And a lot of people don't see that. They just go, oh, G is the safe one, I don't have a negative number. Yes, but, and then how close are you? Because if you're in the front end of your career, you need to understand that while it might be uncomfortable, and you might be a little anxious about it, the market comes back. I mean, it always does. We can look all the way back to 1920 and say it does go up, but it doesn't go up like this, right? It goes up like this. And if you're in the middle of one of these things, it can be really hard. So I recommend that they look at that and then just kind of stick to the logic of it.
And I was going to ask, should we continue to tweak it as we get older?
Yes, but we have the life cycle funds in TSP, which will tweak it for us. I mean, that's really a set it and forget it kind of thing. Every quarter, it's adjusting as we go through time, getting safer and safer and safer, and we don't have to remember to do that ourselves. But as far as the tweaking goes, Mimi, I would say sometimes we tweak it too much. Right? We used to be able to move our TSP around once a day, and a lot of federal employees were doing that. We can't now. We can move it twice a month, unless we're moving it to G, which is still unlimited. But there are a lot of people who drive themselves crazy because they get up in the morning, they watch the news, they go, oh my gosh, and now they're going out there and they're moving their TSP twice a month. When we know that over time, again, it comes back, right? So decide what you're comfortable investing in. Give that some thought. Look at those different risks. What are you comfortable with? Put it in writing if you need to. And then look at it maybe once a quarter, once a month if you have to, but definitely not every day.
Now, what about the difference between the traditional and the Roth? What do you need to be aware of for that?
That's a really great question, too. So a lot of federal employees, the Roth has been around since, I want to say, 2012, right? It's relatively new. A lot of federal employees believe that they have their TSP and separately they have this Roth, which isn't true. You have TSP, which is a box of money, right? And within that box, you have an option of doing traditional TSP where, like a traditional IRA, you're paying your taxes later. You have a Roth side if you're doing it. It's voluntary. You don't have to. But like a Roth IRA, then you're paying your taxes now. But they're still in the box. They're still TSP. It doesn't change your limit. That is for the box as a whole. The one thing that I would say about the Roth is a lot of people under FERS, that new retirement system, remember we have those two? People under FERS get matching contributions from the federal government into their thrift, dollar for the first 3% of their basic biweekly pay that they contribute, and 50 cents on the dollar for the fourth and fifth. There seems to be somewhat of a belief that I have to put in at least 5% of my own money to traditional TSP, or I'm not going to receive that government match. And that's absolutely not true. As long as I'm putting money into the box, it doesn't matter whether I'm doing traditional or Roth, I am going to get those matching funds.
Courtney, I want to turn to you now because the big news this year was the Supreme Court's decision on Roe v. Wade. How are agencies dealing with that?
Sure. So obviously this has been a very contentious political subject, with the midterms, but it's also a very personal issue, and there are, everyday implications for it. So OPM, Office of Personnel Management, said a few days after the ruling that federal employees can use their sick leave to travel for medical care, and this can include an abortion or other reproductive services. They can also use advanced leave. They can receive donated leave through their agency's voluntary leave transfer program or voluntary leave bank program. They can also use this sick leave to accompany a family member to seek such services. Whenever we talk about abortions in the federal government, we do have to remember that the Hyde Amendment is still in place, which prevents the use of federal funds from being used on abortions. There are some exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. But we just have to remember that because it affects the federal government as just not only an insurance provider, but also an employer and a provider of care. Just another example of how agencies are responding, the Veteran Affairs Department said last month that they will be offering reproductive and abortion services in cases of rape, incest, or when the mother's life is at risk for veterans and beneficiaries who qualify for that care. And if anybody is curious about, more of the legal nuances, the Office of Legal Counsel, which is within the Justice Department, released a legal opinion about this a couple weeks ago, kind of outlining that. Another example, the Defense Department said in a memo in June that the Supreme Court's ruling won't affect, the services for abortions they currently provide, once again, in adherence to federal law. And if you want more information on that, they released a Q&A document with the specific nuances. And then just overall, Attorney General Merrick Garland said in the day or two after the ruling that they will defend federal employees who are providing such services, once again, in line with the law.
And Kevin, what about infertility treatments? Will federal plans cover that?
Some will, most won't. This was one of the things that OPM wanted to see plans start doing more with. So every year they have a letter that goes out to the carriers, and this is one of their areas where they said they want to see more infertility treatments. And from OPM's press release a couple of weeks ago, there are 4 new plans that are offering some infertility coverage. Most of the infertility coverage that you'll find is really with HMOs. You won't, for example, like the Blue Cross plans, they only have a very narrow infertility use case. But you will find some HMO plans that will cover some of the assisted reproductive technology treatments. And there are some examples that are out there. UPMC, for example, in Western Pennsylvania, they have a $25,000 lifetime benefit for infertility coverage. That's one of the highest that I have seen. That's new for this year. Understand that even when a health plan says that they're going to help cover one of those services, that you are still going to have to pay, okay, either a copay or a co-insurance. These are still very expensive services, so you should really, be thinking about, are there some, different ways that we can help pay for this? The flexible spending account is one way to set aside at least some money and on a tax-preferred basis to help pay for expensive out-of-pocket treatments.
Debbie, I want to ask you about life insurance. What do workers need to know about life insurance?
Well, I think that we need to understand if we're getting it through the federal government, it's got to be in place 5 years prior to retirement if we plan to take it out the door. So we have to really plan ahead of time. And any part or parcel that we plan to take into retirement has to be in place 5 years before we retire. I think that we, as just people, need to really stop and think about why we have life insurance. Like, what is our intent? Why do we feel like we should pay for life insurance? And it may be that we're covering expenses, certainly, if I'm working, my spouse is there, I've got kids, we've got a mortgage, we've got all of these things, they're gonna notice if something happens to me and my income isn't coming in. But a lot of times, too, people are making decisions about life insurance because they want to do something. They want to be able to leave money, perhaps to a charity or perhaps for their grandchildren to go to school or something like that. We really need to think about why we want life insurance.
There's also a federal death benefit that people might not know about.
So many people don't know about it, yes. If a person is working for the federal government when they pass away, then their survivors are entitled to death benefits. This is in addition to their life insurance. It depends on whether that person was a CSRS employee or a FERS employee under CSRS. And I mentioned that even though it's the old system, we still have some of those employees within the federal government. The numbers have gotten smaller because we haven't placed people in that system since 1983, and we're down to single digits, but they are still out there. If it's a CSRS employee that passed away, then their survivor gets a monthly benefit. It is 55% of whatever that person's retirement would have been had they simply retired on that day rather than passing away. For the FERS employees, those under that new system, as long as that person had 18 months or more in the federal government before they pass away, if they're married, their spouse is entitled to a benefit that is about $37,000 that comes from the federal government, and the surviving spouse can choose to take that as a single lump sum payment or spread it out in monthly payments for the next 3 years. It's up to them. They get another payment that equals half of that person's annual salary or half of their high three, whichever is greater. That was a year and a half. If I have at least 10 years of creditable service in before I pass away, then in addition to those lump sums, my surviving spouse is also eligible for a monthly benefit that equals half of what my retirement would have been. And that doesn't cost the person anything. Like I said, that's in addition to life insurance, it's in addition to TSP, and I do retirement seminars 3 to 5 days a week. Generally, federal employees have never heard of that. They don't know anything about it. So definitely their family members don't know anything about it.
Okay, so we're going to do our final question to each of you. I'm going to start with Kevin, and then after that, we'll take questions from the audience. So be thinking about your questions. Kevin, what is the one thing we haven't covered today that federal employees need to know about?
Right, there is this kind of strange thing with premiums. If you're a two-person family, either a couple or a parent and a child, there are 86 health plans out there where if you enroll as self and family, it's less expensive than self plus one. And that can change every year as to whether self plus one is less expensive or self and family is less expensive. So if you are that two-person family, if you do nothing else, see which of those is less expensive. Making the right choice could save you, in some cases, up to $1,500 or cost you an extra $1,500 for the same health plan and the same benefits. You get the same thing if you enroll either way.
Courtney.
I would say, with the midterms coming up in a few weeks, federal employees might be wondering what they can do in terms of political activity. This is a little bit, benefits of life experiences adjacent, but there are two classes of federal employees in terms of the Hatch Act. There's less restricted and further restricted, which are basically self-explanatory. So that would be something I would just plug to, keep in mind when it comes to, donations, campaign events, stuff like that. The Office of Special Counsel's website has a lot of Q&A information about that, and I will give a quick plug for a series I've been doing for Government Executive on that, just some everyday questions you might have about that as we're a couple weeks up from the midterms.
Debbie.
And I would say today's seems to be focused a lot on the health insurance, which is really, really important. A lot of federal employees are concerned about being able to provide that health insurance to their spouses if something were to happen to them. So in order for me to leave that health insurance benefit to my surviving spouse, I have to leave that person a survivor benefit. A lot of times people go, I'm going to get the life insurance plan, and the life insurance will provide the money, but the life insurance does not provide access to the health insurance. So if you want your spouse to be able to have that health insurance, you need to leave at least a partial survivor benefit. It doesn't have to be the full amount, it doesn't have to be the maximum, but you've got to leave them some money, or they can only have the FEHB while you are living.
All right, well, that's it for this part. Now we get to talk to you guys and take your questions.
This year, the Thrift Savings Plan rolled out the mutual fund window. I just wanted to hear the panelists' thoughts on that. And if you'll indulge me in one more question, the federal long-term care insurance program is up for renewal next year. FELTSIP has come under increased scrutiny. I can't help but think of WAEPA and their chronic illness rider, but any thoughts on what this means for current enrollees and future enrollees in FELTSIP? So first mutual fund window in TSP and the FELTSIP program.
Yeah, TSP went through some substantial changes this summer. One of those is the rollout of that mutual fund window, bringing on board 5,000 mutual funds. What are my thoughts on that? I think that's a little bit overwhelming. We have many federal employees who have struggled with choosing between G, FC, SI, and a variety of life cycles. So to bring now 5,000 new things out, I think that that's not going to be something that the majority of the federal workforce is going to take advantage of just because they don't know enough about it. I will say one thing people need to know about those mutual fund windows is that there are additional costs. One of the biggest benefits that we have as federal employees is the administrative fee with TSP. It's very, very low. If I'm doing the mutual funds, I have an administrative fee now that I have to pay, and there is a per trade fee for that as well. And one further thing with the mutual funds, it's kind of a buyer beware, investor beware, because those mutual funds are left in the prospectus, and if I'm investing in one, I need to do my own research. I need to make sure that that is actually something that I want to invest in. The Thrift Savings Board is not doing that research for us like they are with the traditional funds.
Any other comments? Other questions from the audience?
Good morning, thank you. I found the panel very, very helpful. I'm a foreign service officer, so my benefits will be different when I retire. Thank you very much, Kevin, for that hypothetical of a person retiring in Panama. And I guess that's like one of the things I'm interested in is that, I have a lot of colleagues who telework now from overseas. And I know I have friends who, even in the civil service, they've retired to Mexico, and there's people who retire in the Philippines. is it more difficult for the federal government to deliver the retirement benefits when the beneficiaries are overseas? Thank you.
And so as far as the retirement delivery goes, when a federal employee fills out their retirement application, just prior to signing and dating that, there are 3 options for how they would like to get their payment. One of those options is that I want it deposited into my savings or checking account. And if that's the option, then I give them my routing number and account number and everything else. So that would still be seamless. A second option is that the retiree could elect to have that money put onto a debit card. That's an option for them. And then the third box is, I live in a country that does not allow the automatic deposit into my bank account. So I would say, no, it's not going to be any more difficult. The person elects how they're getting their money.
And on the health insurance side, I mean, I think you probably already know that because you're in foreign service, you have additional plans that are available to you. So the foreign service benefit plan would be one, and then also the Blue Cross plans. You want to look for an international provider network so that when you do need that routine health care, that you're with a plan that will cover you.
Any other questions?
Mimi, we have a question from one of our online attendees, and it piggybacks off of the question that was just asked, and it says, how many FEHB plans are available that cover international health care if you plan on spending up to half the year out of the country?
Yeah, it's really, so depending upon what you're eligible to join, not everyone can join the foreign service benefit plan. There's also a Compass Rose plan that has limited enrollment. If you are that person that is spending, up to 6 months in a foreign country, you're really left with the Blue Cross plans as a very strong international network. Keep in mind something I said earlier, if you're on holiday backpacking in Europe for 2 weeks and you break your leg on the Alps, every FEHB plan is going to cover that. You may have to pay out of pocket to begin with, and the plan will reimburse you. But every FEHB plan has emergency overseas care. That's just built into every FEHB plan.
Another question?
Yes. Thank you again. One of the things I'm wondering about, I've had a lot of experience. I know a lot of people who they have a hard time getting coverage from mental health professionals, particularly psychiatrists, because so many of them don't participate in any network plans. And they don't because of such low reimbursement rates. So I'm wondering, especially after the pandemic and so much news coverage of how people's mental health were affected by it, why are the reimbursement rates so low? Is that an OPM? Is that because of OPM, or is that because of many of the health companies they don't want to cover, or they have such low reimbursement rates? Are they the ones setting the rates? And do you see a trend of that changing after we've seen so much coverage on mental health due to the pandemic? Thank you.
Well, every FEHB plan has mental health coverage. I don't feel qualified to talk about the interactions between OPM and the health plans in terms of reimbursement. That's something that we're not able to really look at and understand much on.
Other questions?
Yeah, I was thinking about mental health coverage. I know right now, Blue Cross Blue Shield, the plan that our employees are in, is going toe-to-toe with Johns Hopkins. And we've been notified that Johns Hopkins, which is a massive health system, may be pulling out of the plan. I don't know if the federal network, the federal plan's network is any different, or if they use.
Yeah, I heard for someone last night that reached out to me with that exact same question. They said it was Care First, and I was unclear whether it was Care First Blue Cross or whether it was the Blue Cross Blue Standard carrier that's providing the basic standard and FEP Blue Focus plans.
Okay, good. That's good. The other question is related to benefits sort of, but it's an important one that the whole country, employers are wrestling with, and that's telework, remote work. What's the combination of working from home and working in the office? Now, I'm not talking about people who must be, federal employees who must be on the job. You know, TSA employees, for example, must be on site. Is there any talk that you guys are hearing about, does the federal government have a permanent plan in place? Are they shifting around? Like, I know we work with New York Life, and New York Life has made a permanent decision to do 3-2. Two out of the office, 3 in, and those 3 are on one day. Other employers are starting to come up with fast and hard rules. Do you know anything about what the federal government's doing on this?
Take that. So like I mentioned earlier, it really has been on an agency by agency basis, and sometimes even more, individualized. Overall, the Biden administration, officials who are kind of like providing guidance have said, you can use telework, remote work, or flexible work hours because of the success we've seen with the pandemic. And, they're trying to remain competitive in the labor market. Already, it's hard to get younger people into the federal government, or just, other people when they're shifting jobs that they can get, paid more in the private sector and they can work from home that might be more attractive to them. So we're kind of in a period of transition, which has been going on, I'd say, the last year and a half or so. But the top officials at OPM and OMB, they're really saying like you have these flexibilities if you need. And also, like I had mentioned earlier, the president did say, yeah, the federal government, it's I think 2.1 million employees, and that's not including contractors. We are going to be a leader here. But again, they're not saying you have to come back or you have to be remote. It's very individual. But yeah, it's definitely a period of transition, and the federal government, this is not happening in a vacuum. This is happening throughout the country. Employers are having these conversations about finding what that right balance is for their team, whether it be, a mix of both or just one extreme or the other.
And it does affect pay and benefits, in the private, thank you. That just came out of nowhere. So, for example, I know private employers are thinking, if you're going to work remotely full-time, you might be able to work 500 miles away, and the benefits may be very different there, what's available, what they cost. So it does have implications for benefits, for sure. Is OPM or any of the agencies thinking about that, or is this just, we're still swimming in it and trying to figure it out?
Would defer to one of my co-panelists on that.
I think they're still trying to figure it out.
Is there any research around what people want, what the government wants? Is there loss of productivity? Is it more expensive? I know real estate companies are struggling with the empty offices, but is there any research that the government has sponsored around coming back to work?
I can talk, this isn't a survey with hard data, but my publication, we did a call out earlier this year. We asked for federal employees to give us feedback on, it was like around the 2-year anniversary of the maximum work from home. And the federal employees, my colleagues and I spoke to, they all pretty much had pretty positive things to say. Some said, oh yeah, I do miss like the in-person interaction. But a lot of people do like having the ability to, just like roll out of bed and like go on your computer. So it seems like it was a positive experience for a lot. Obviously it's not a hard and fast rule, and I'm sorry, I'm not giving you a number, but just anecdotally, throughout the country, we made sure to get a pretty diverse representation of the federal workforce, because obviously everyone's just not here in DC. That's what I'd say.
I'm really sorry, it just popped into my head. Caregiving, childcare, caring for their elderly. I think that it became really apparent when people were teleworking how important that is in order to continue their careers. So, especially in Washington, it's hard to get one's toddler into childcare. The waiting lists are quite long. Do we see any movement, whether in the private sector or for the federal workforce, on making sure people can get childcare or like kind of elderly care? I think the private sector is probably watching that space very closely. Thank you.
Anybody know about childcare? No, sorry, we can't help.
I would say as far as
outside of having it, make sure that you have a dependent care FSA.
Right.
I mean, that's
That's what I was gonna say.
another program that's available to you to help pay for some of the cost. Trust me, it doesn't come anywhere close to what you're paying. I know, I've been there.
All right, can we take one more, or that's it? One more.
So there are currently 3 iterations of FERS: FERS Classic, FERS Ray, FERS Fray. What are the tea leaves? Is Congress contemplating maybe another iteration of FERS, potentially future federal employees without a pension, or other changes to the retirement system with potentially eliminating the Social Security supplement?
I would say that's always a potential. I don't ever guess what Congress is going to be talking about, and what they do talk about, what is going to actually pass into law. The difference between the FERS Classic that you called, which we just called just FERS, right? FERS Ray, FERS Fray, is that federal employees have to pay now more towards their own benefits. It was 0.8, and now it can be up to 4.9, depending on whether there's special provisions or not, if they're under FERS Fray. Could more of that happen? Yes. Do they talk about it? Yes. Do they talk about eliminating the FERS supplement? Quite frequently, yes. It hasn't happened at this point. So what I tell federal employees when they ask me that is that we just need to pay attention to it. You know, when they're talking about it, if you feel strongly about it, make sure that you're talking to your representative and letting them know that how you feel about it. But until something is passed, I'm not going to think about it. There's just too much out there. We can worry about stuff all day. And until something happens, I will educate myself. I will stay on top of it. But I'm not going to try to forecast what's going to happen, because it's just impossible.
And that's our last word. Debbie and Courtney and Kevin, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And I will pass it back to Shane for closing remarks. We leave, right?
Thank you very much to the panel. That is always our most highly reviewed piece of the conference every time we do this. So it's really important. There's a lot of deep dive stuff, and I'm sure you could contact any one of them if you wanted to have further discussions. And if you're wondering what's better, WAEPA or FEHB, I'm pretty sure we know the answer. I'd like to thank everybody that played a role in this. First, Stacy, where's Stacy? There's Stacy. Stacy, you and your team did a fantastic job putting this together. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the leadership team. We haven't had them up here before, but they make WAEPA go. Without them, this wouldn't happen. And you got a chance to meet them and see them today. So thank you to the WAEPA leadership team. And thank you to the board of directors. They are a critically important piece of this organization and its success. So we have Joel and Greg from the board. We had Doug earlier. Without your guys, not just oversight, but input and direction and knowledge and expertise, which you bring to us, I don't think we'd be as successful as we are. So a round of applause for the board. Just on a personal note, in my previous job, I spent 4 or 5 years in 1800 Diagonal office building. That's right above Joe Theismann's restaurant. In fact, if I looked out my window, I could see the awnings of his restaurant. It's the best calamari on the planet. Go do it. It's good stuff. We're going to email a survey around to everybody. Please fill that out. We take your feedback, and we'll listen this year as we always do. Coming back from 3 years remote, I think in many cases we're all trying to figure this out. So please comment and give us your feedback. We do have a $100,000 guaranteed issue life offer out there right now for those people who are not members yet but would like to be. Please stop by. We have a desk, a booth out here with member services reps, so we can answer questions about that. But also, at least get started on questions you might have about your policy. The final thing I'd like to say is lunch. We have boxed lunches. You can stay here and eat, or you can take it with you. I think we have the room till 1. So please feel free to stay and eat, or just grab it and go. So thank you all very much for being here. It's been a great event, and thank you.